So like I said to the kids, we're going to be talking about love today. But before we do that, I want us to think about the limitations of our language when it comes to this concept of love. And I want to do that by first talking about the fact that in our English language, we sometimes have only one word for something that other languages have a whole bunch of words. Take, for example, one of our favorite topics here in the wintertime. Take snow, for example. Legend has it that the Eskimos, or the Inuit and Yupik peoples who live in the northernmost regions, or the northernmost habitable regions of our globe, the legend has it that those two peoples have about 50 words to describe snow, or to name snow. Our one word, snow, they have 50 words for all the different kinds of snow that they experience. They're so well acquainted with snow. It is such a basic part of their life that they've expanded their understanding of snow way beyond what most of the time we English speakers have for that. But even in our limited experience, our single English word snow, as any of us who have to clear our driveways know, is simply inadequate. Because even in our experience, we know there's all different kinds of snow, right? I remember a couple of years ago we had a big snowstorm and there were 18 inches of snow, but the snow was so light and fluffy that it really wasn't that big of a deal to get rid of it. On the other hand, I've had snowstorms, and you have as well, where we've only had 2 or 3 inches, but the snow is so wet and heavy that it breaks your back trying to get it out of the way. These are different kinds of snow, isn't there? We had the snow that we had just a couple weeks ago, where it was overlaid with a crust of ice, and we had to break through the crust of ice to get rid of it. All kinds of different types of snow, and yet we still have only that one word for snow. You'd think, especially here in the Northeast, that we would become a little bit more sophisticated, to take a clue from the Inuits and the Yupiks. Now, if that's true for snow, it's even more true for another word, that word that we use to refer to a part of our lives that is far more important to our health and well-being and sense of purpose in our lives, rather more than snow. That word is love. If there was ever a word that needed some elaboration, some expansion, some further clarification, it is that little word love. But at least for us English speakers, just like snow, our language doesn't provide us with much help when we talk about love. We use the word love for so many different things to signify the most deeply impacting relationships of our lives, with our parents, with our partners, with God. But then we're also saying, well, I love pizza. Right? I mean, you know, these aren't the same things, at least for most of us. I don't know, I've known a few people who have an intimate relationship with pizza, but most of us, when we're talking about those things, it's completely different. We talk about love as something we fall into as if it were a hole in the ground. We use the same word when we talk about our favorite meal than we use around a cherished individual. How is it that love can cover all of these different depths of feelings, and how do we sort them out? I can't help but think of these things as I ponder the lesson that we just read from 1 Corinthians 13, which talks about love. And I remember back to my seminary classes where I learned that unlike the English language, which only has one word for love that we use for all kinds of things, the New Testament has the Greek, which is written in Greek, that has 3 Greek words that are always translated into our one single word, love. Some of you might be familiar with some of this. So in the Bible, when it translates the word love, it might mean any one of those 3 types of love. So the first Greek word that we find sometimes in the New Testament that is translated as love is eros. E-R-O-S, eros. And that is our romantic love, our sexual love. It's the root for our word erotic. And it's the kind of love that we sometimes experience when we meet someone and something just sort of goes off in us, right? Our heart starts to go pitter-patter. And we have some kind of, sometimes it's just a physical reaction to meeting that person. And then as we continue to get to know them, that same sort of feeling of romantic and sexual love continues to grow in some cases at least. And it's hopefully returned by the other person. And it's an awfully hard thing when it isn't, as some of us know all too well. The interesting thing about eros is that it's pretty selective. We don't go around feeling eros about everyone, right? Thank goodness. No, it's only those certain persons that we look at and something just clicks for us. So that's the first word, eros. And then there is the second word, which is phileos. P-H-I-L-E-O-S. Phileos is kind of like brotherly or sisterly love. It's the reason that we call Philadelphia, sometimes call it the city of brotherly love, because phila in Delphia is the same word, the same root as phileos, that is translated in the New Testament as love. So Philadelphia is the city of phileos love. And this is the kind of love that all of us experience, of just simply affection and warm feelings about other people in our lives. Our friends, sometimes this is with our family members. Just in general, we feel, we meet someone, we like them, we feel good about them, we'd like to help them out in whatever way we can, and oftentimes this is reciprocated. But while it isn't as selective as eros, phileos is still not something that we feel for everyone, right? That neighbor that drives us up a wall, we don't necessarily have a whole lot of phileos for them. That person sitting next to us in church, sometimes we don't necessarily have a lot of phileos. You ever met those sandpaper people that just rub you the wrong way? So phileos is also selective. It's not as selective as eros, but it's still, we experience that for some folks and not so much with others. There's a final Greek word that is used to denote love. It gets translated as love in our English translations of the New Testament. And this one more of you may have heard of than the others. And that's agape love. How many of you ever heard of agape? Agape love is a love that transcends and goes beyond either of the other 2 types of love. Those loves are are fine. We're not talking about that they aren't good. But agape love is divine love. It's self-giving. It's sacrificial. It's risky. It's steady. And there ain't a whole lot of emotion involved in it. Did you notice that about Paul's list? That there's not a whole lot of emotion. It's decision. It's commitment. So agape, unlike eros and phileos, isn't partial. It doesn't make distinctions. We are called to share agape love with everyone that we meet. It's unconditional. We say sometimes that God loves us and there's nothing we can do about it, because God's love is agape love. It's unconditional. And then we aim to have that same thing, to be able to say to people, I love you with agape love, and there's nothing you can do about it. That's agape love, and that love begins with God, that is extended to all people, and we are called to do the same. Now, I kind of tipped it off a little bit, but let's do a little quick poll here. When we read 1 Corinthians 13, and it talks all about love, which of those three words, eros, phileos, or agape, do you think Paul is using for love? Anybody want to get, how many think it was eros? No? How about phileos? Oh, you guys are good students. How many say agape? Yes, when we read 1 Corinthians 13, it's all, the only word used in there from the Greek is agape. And it's the kind of love that we see most fully and completely expressed in the life of Jesus. You want to know what agape love looks like? Look at the life of Jesus and know that agape love is unconditional, risky, self-giving, and not selfish in any way. So let's spend a little bit more time talking about agape love this morning because, like I said, phileos and eros are all great. I mean, it's nice to feel your heart go pitter-patter. It's nice to have good feelings about being with your friends. But those kinds of love pale against agape love. Now, if you've ever, like I said, been to a Christian wedding, you've more than likely heard 1 Corinthians 13 read during the service. And some people have said, oh, well, no, that's really not an appropriate reading in terms of how most people think about love for weddings, because we should be talking more about eros. I mean, weddings today and marriage is considered the celebration of eros, right? I disagree with those who say that 1 Corinthians 13 shouldn't be read at weddings, because ultimately, when eros maybe begins to calm down a little bit between a husband and wife or partners, when phileos even gets challenged, that's when agape comes in. I'll share with you a little bit more of what I mean by that. The highest form of love, like I said, the selfless, risky kind of love that Jesus so wonderfully and fully incarnated, is what is the glue that holds all of our relationships together. And the more intimate those relationships, the more agape has to be there. God created us to have the sort of feelings of eros and phileos, and the ongoing reproduction of the human race depends upon eros. But the highest expression and experience of love is agape. Understand that what separates agape from eros and phileos, makes it a higher expression of love, is that all the other types of love are conditional. They depend in one way or another how the other person responds to us. For romantic love to fully flower, as we already said, it needs to be reciprocated or it doesn't go anywhere. And brotherly love and sisterly love and affection, while it is less intense and tension-filled than eros, only works when there is some mutual response, when people connect on some level or hit it off, as they say. And maybe some of us have had the experience of somebody we would like to be friends with who just has no interest in particularly being close with us. But agape love is something else altogether. And that's because agape love, as we've already said, is not about feelings. It is not a feeling that needs to be echoed by another person. It is not a feeling at all. Rather, it is a decision to make, to be there for another person, regardless of how we feel about them at any given moment, and regardless of how they feel about us. It is this kind of love, agape, is our example, that every parent must be able to show their children, especially in those most trying times, sometimes perhaps when it's the terrible twos or adolescence. You as a parent need to love your child even when they think they hate you. Amen? Amen. You as a parent needs to love your child even when you think you hate them. Y'all are not hearing me. Do you ever feel that way? I mean, I love my children, but sometimes it is the kind of love that a parent shows where we need to love our child no matter what, even when it's difficult. You love them anyway. That's a God. And it's hard, hard work, as any parent knows. And contrary to the messages that we receive over and over again from our popular culture, it is not at all easy most of the time. How many of you know what I'm talking about? In fact, agape love is often sloppy. By that I mean that it involves the down and dirty work of loving somebody in the midst of all the garbage that they bring into the relationship. And don't forget, we bring some of our own garbage into relationships too. Here's the thing that we ought to remember when it comes to agape love. Agape love very often doesn't feel anything like we think love is supposed to feel. It's the love that endures and moves through and survives all of the challenges. And it's not just within the parent-child relationship that agape needs to be expressed. Because when you think about it, even our eros and phileos relationships will only reach a certain level of depth if we can't bring some agape into them. Those of us who have been married for more than a couple of years know that sooner or later you wake up next to this stranger and you say to yourself, who is this person sleeping next to me? They sure aren't the person I married. I mean, they sort of look like them, but... And they at some point will say the same thing about you. Stanley Hauerwas from Duke Divinity School once wrote that the most basic law of marriage could be stated in one sentence. You always marry the wrong person. But then he goes on to say, the one you thought to be Mr. or Mrs. Right turns out not to be. Mr. or Mrs. Right tends to show up after the marriage. But the adventure of marriage is learning to love the person to whom you are married. Love does not create a marriage. Marriage teaches us what a costly adventure love is. For anyone who is married, it is true that you may not be married now to the person you once thought you were marrying. Amen? 5 years from now or 10 years from now, the person sitting next to you won't necessarily be the person you thought you were giving yourselves to on that wedding day so long ago. So if marriage requires us to choose just exactly the right person, well, we're in really big trouble, aren't we? But that's the worldview of marriage. You find your soulmate. And if you don't find your soulmate, well, then tough luck. Or else maybe, like I said before, after you're married, someone who you thought, really, well, I was wrong about that. I found my soulmate. And then they run after that person because they got it wrong the first time. But agape love is the love that endures, and that is a decision. Like I said, if marriage requires us to choose just exactly the right person, we're in big trouble because the target keeps shifting. Marrying means promising to be faithful to someone who may keep changing. Imagine that. And so during weddings, the church does not ask, Christopher, do you love Hannah? Or Hannah, do you love Christopher? We know they already do. They're in eros. They're crazy love, you know, most of the time. No, we don't ask that question, do you love? We say, Christopher, will you love Hannah? Hannah, will you love Christopher? And there's a huge difference in those questions, isn't there? Agape love is the question of, will you continue to do all you can to love that person? Whatever changes go through, whether good or bad, whether in sickness or in health. A lovely story that I came across a number of years ago. It stayed with me. It's told by a surgeon about a woman that he operated on. He had to operate on her face because she had a tumor in her face. And of course the face is full of nerves, and so this surgeon was concerned that he may just by chance or by necessity cut some nerve that would change the look of this young woman's face. She says, I stand by the bed where a young woman lies, her face post-operative, her mouth twisted in palsy, clownish. A tiny facial nerve, the one to the muscles of her mouth, has been severed. That's his worst fears had come to pass. And she was never going to look like she had looked before. Her young husband is in the room. He stands on the opposite side of the bed. Will my mouth always be like this? The young woman asks. Yes, I say. It will. It is because the nerve was cut. She nods and is silent. But the young man smiles. I like it, he says. It's kind of cute. All at once I know who he is. I understand and lower my gaze. One is not bold in an encounter with God. Unmindful, the husband bends to kiss her crooked mouth. And I am so close, I can see how he twists his own lips to accommodate hers, to show that their kiss still works. Isn't that lovely? That's agape. That's agape love. Twisting your mouth to be able to kiss the other person, no matter what their lips look like later on. You see, I got to thinking about that, and I said, you know, that's the love that is shown for us. Jesus is God twisting or kissing our twisted mouth. Isn't that wonderful? We might be misshapen in all sorts of ways. Sometimes the words that come out of our mouth are not what we would want to have them be, and we get sort of twisted. And Jesus keeps coming and twisting and kissing our twisted mouths. We're going to have communion in a little while. That's a time when Jesus reaches down, bends down to us, and kisses our twisted mouth. That's agape. It's the agape love that we experience as followers of Jesus, that unconditional love that accepts us and roots for us and works alongside us and loves us when we blow it. The kind of love that, as we were saying, there's nothing you can do about it. It's just going to be there. When we accept for what God has done for us in Jesus Christ, we begin to fully experience agape. And it is out of that experience that we are able to dare to share that Ser love with the people in our lives and in the world around us.